For a slow start, the Huskers capitalized on 3 interceptions from the defense to beat the Fordham Rams 52-7. Hi, I'm Aaron Muller, and this is episode 2 of the Cobsmacked Podcast. This is a Nebraska football podcast where we cover the Husker season and team news as they develop throughout the year. We're going to do a recap of Game 2 versus the Fordham Rams. Like I mentioned, the defense really stepped up later on in the game, but early on in the game, Adrian Martinez had a fumble, and the driving game from Fordham, their quarterback was throwing very accurately. Their wide receivers seemed to snag anything that was in the air, and you could just feel like a growing sense of dread from the almost 86,000 people that showed up to the stadium. And I know the whole thing about don't underestimate your opponent. Anything can happen in college football, but this was an FCS school, so it should have been an easy game. And it with looking across the board at the lines and how the size matchups works, and they are an FCS school. They do not have as much talent as we do. That's just like the way it was. We knew that they were going to come in here to play. In the pregame podcast I talked about, I did mention that this is probably their biggest game of the season. Like size-wise, this is the biggest stadium that they've played in by far. That's a fact. But like this was a bowl game to them. What other opponents are they going to play that are on the same level as the Huskers for the rest of the year? Even if they make like their championship in their division, it's not going to be anywhere near as big or as exciting as it was to come into Memorial Stadium and play a traditioned program like the Huskers. But anyway, you could feel like those early mistakes, and you had like, I was still in Columbus, but you could feel it like from the stadium. You could feel all these like collective sighs of like, oh, here we go again. These mistakes are going to cost us another game, but they didn't. They nearly tied the game with 7:50 left in the second quarter. They were going to kick a field goal to tie it 10-10, and the Huskers blocked the field goal. And from that point on, it kind of turned the game around. Things started stacking up slowly. We ended up leading 24-7 at halftime. We had the 2 interceptions in the first half, and the first one was not on the quarterback at all. The first one was like a deflected. The wide receiver just didn't grab it, went right through his hands, and I believe JoJo Doman picked that one off. But he had another one in the first half that was all him. Not to take away from the defensive back. The defensive back obviously made a play on the ball, and it looked great. We're happy for anything we get. Like I said, we led 24-7 at halftime, and then in the second half, it was just we shut them down. The defense shut them down, which we should have in the beginning, but those slow starts seem to be kind of like the custom anymore. So overall, I feel like the offensive line and the defensive line they underperformed. Like I said, they had a size advantage on both sides of the ball. They should have been able to run wherever and however they wanted to, and that just wasn't the case. The running backs had a hard time getting started. They were only getting, 2, 3, 4 yards per carry in the first half. Second half was a little different because the defense was tiring on the Fordham side of the ball. Somebody that did stick out was Samori Toure. He was important last game. He's a great catch that we got. Like, we got lucky to get that guy in. But he showed his worth this game specifically. He had 8 catches for 133 yards, and then he also had 3 rushing attempts for 35 yards and a touchdown. So, they were big plays too. Like he was, when we needed a momentum boost, he was there to, catch the big play. Going over some of the stats, I have a stat table here, but we had over 600 yards of total offense. We had 304 passing yards, 329 rushing yards, so it was pretty even there. We held Fordham to under 300 yards, which listening to different podcasts that I have been listening to, like the Nick Behe podcast and with Bo Rude, and just anybody that knows college football, they said that holding anybody, it doesn't matter who it is, and the NCAA to under 300 yards, under 400 yards is like an accomplishment, because now everything's, airball, everything's offense. Everything is built around offense anymore. Defenses are important, yes, but with the way that the rules and stuff have changed over the years, holding somebody to under 300 is impressive. It didn't feel that way in the first half. Like I said, the first quarter and a half was a lot different than the rest of the game played out. But that's always how it is. It seems with the Husker games, it seems like there's always one or two key moments that typically we let slip away, or we make a mistake and we let the game slip away from us at that point. But that just didn't happen in this game. I'm hoping that it's because that's behind us now. We've kind of learned from our mistakes. We've found every single way to lose a game possible. So I'm hoping that that's the case. But it could also be that it's FCS school, so your mistakes aren't as killer as they would be playing against a Big Ten opponent, which I still strongly would make an argument that the Big Ten is the hardest conference in college football. Everybody seems to look at the SEC and say that they are the hardest, by division, that they are the hardest conference in America. But if you look at the Big Ten, like, we all play hard-nosed football. None of those games in the Big Ten are easy wins. Look at Illinois. They got smacked this week by nobody, but they got a game from us last week. Or, there's just so many different instances where it doesn't matter who you are going to play in the Big Ten. The Big Ten is a hard conference. There is no easy wins. Any week you can get beat by anybody in the Big Ten. We did have the 3 interceptions I mentioned. So we had 2 in the first half, 1 in the second half. And so, those were huge. We capitalized on all 3 of those with touchdowns. We did only have 1 sack, so that was a little disappointing. I was assuming we were going to have a lot more success getting behind the line. We had the 1 sack and then 5 tackles for loss, but they also had 1 sack and 4 tackles for loss. So as far as the defensive side of it went, the first half felt like, if they would have continued to be able to play we made adjustments, obviously, but if their quarterback had time, he was making accurate passes, and their wide receivers seemed to have glue on their hands. They were like catching everything that they could get their hand on. We kind of crushed that. I don't know if maybe we were starting to put more pressure on him in the second half. I know we were flushing him out of the pocket more often. I just don't know if that was consistent. I could have sworn we had more sacks until I went back and looked at the stats, and they said we only had 1. Maybe we just had a lot of quarterback hurries and stuff like that. But I feel like against a small school like that, we should have been able to punch through a lot more often. And we did well last week against Illinois, but for some reason we didn't have as much success this week. Special teams went a lot better. We had 2 punts for 40 yards average on each, and they were like, one was 39, one was 41. They were averaging 40. It wasn't like one long one and then one short one. He did well compared to last week where I think we had a 13 or somewhere in there, 13, 14 yard punt last week, and that's just not going to cut it. We were 1 for 1 on field goals. We did block one of their field goals, which was another big momentum shift. Like I said, like once we blocked the field goal, from that point on, the game changed. It felt like it was going to be a back and forth game at that point, at least up until halftime. I always thought that FCS school could maybe hold with us till halftime, and then at that point they don't have the depth that we would have here with the talent that we have here to, tire them out. They did also punt it for six punts for 32 points. 6 punts for 36.2 yards on average. We did get 31 first downs, so it wasn't just big plays that were making it to the end zone every time, like you might see at some of the air raid schools. But I prefer that. I like the first downs. It keeps the clock going, keeps the chains moving, and the short, consistent downs are easier to make than trying to hit these lottery tickets every time you throw a ball down the field. You still need those. You still need those to stretch the offense or the defense out so you can run it also, which was another big thing. Like I said, we had 329 rushing yards. We were pounding the ball, and that was very important. It was one of the keys that I said that I felt like we needed to focus on the run game. We needed to make that a priority, and we did. Adrian had 2 rushing touchdowns himself, and yes, you'd love to see your quarterback pass it, but touchdown's a touchdown. It doesn't matter. The game was fairly clean, too. Each team only had 2 penalties, only for 10 and 15 yards each, respectively. And so I had some noteworthy takeaways from the stats. The senior linebacker that I mentioned, so I said really there was only one player that should be mentioned outside of their quarterback. I said if he had time, that Tim Demarat would have, if he'd have time, he'd make accurate passes, which he did. But that only lasted for a quarter and a half. On the defensive side, I said really the only star that we should worry about on their side is their senior linebacker, Ryan Greenhagen, and I was not wrong. He had 30 tackles. That's a ridiculous amount of tackles. I have that written down that is more than our top 7 tacklers combined in the game. So you could take our top 7 guys, how many tackles they had, and he still had more tackles than those top 7 dudes. It actually ties an NCAA Division I record. I think there was 2 other people that had him, in the last 2 decades or so. But they were asking players and coaches after the game, like, what did you think about this guy? And they might not have known his name, but they knew his number. His number was 47. They're like, number 47. When Marquise Stepp was asked about it, he's like, "Are you for real? 30 tackles? That guy's a monster." And he was. Like, that was ridiculous. Like, he got hurt late in the 4th at 29, and I was like, I was hoping he'd be able to come back in, but it seemed like every time that there was a tackle or any time that somebody got wrapped up early, or it didn't matter where the ball was on the field, he was there, and he was just like all over the place. It was crazy. Like I said, I was impressed by the quarterback in the first half, quarter and a half. If you take, I actually had to go through stat by stat because I couldn't find anywhere that had the stats for the first half versus the stats for the second half. Out of the 163 passing yards that Fordham had all game, he had 148 of those in the first half. And that's like a crazy amount. Like, that means we shut him down to where he only had 17 passing yards in the second half. So, like, when I said that the defense locked it up and they played a lot better in the second half, that's about as accurate as you're going to get. You went from 148 yards passing in the first half to 17 in the second half. And they hurried him. That was the big difference. Is if you can get pressure on the quarterback, then he cannot make as accurate passes. And his wide receivers, like I said, they have hands. They were catching passes in the first half, but like second half, he wasn't getting it close, or he was throwing it short because the deep balls were no longer viable because our corners had locked up the receivers. It made a big difference once we made the adjustments we did, which I'm not sure which adjustments they actually made, or if the players just kind of snapped into it and were like, this is not going to be a pushover game, because no game in college football anymore is going to be a pushover game. Scott Frost made a comment like that. He said that the talent across the board, doesn't matter where you go, every team's going to have talent. And that seems to be the case. I mean, there's a lot of different, I was looking up the different scores from all over college football this week, and there was a lot of, Oklahoma played a team really close. Tulane, I think. They played a game really close. Like, they could have lost that game against Tulane. They're not an FCS school, I don't think. But I mean, FCS schools are more than capable of beating an FBS school if they're not paying attention, or if like I said, they come into these games thinking they're like bowl games. Like, that's a big game for that school that's not very big. Anyways, like I said, defense gets all the credit there. They got the 3 interceptions, which the offense, to their credit, got capitalized on, because the big issue the last however many games is that the offense cannot seem to stay on the field. The offense cannot seem to capitalize on the defense's good plays. The defense plays well for the most part in every game we have. There's exceptions to that, but for the most part, under Scott Frost, my big criticism is that he came in here as an offensive guru, and that's just not what we're seeing. We've seen that today. Again, it was against the FCS school, so you got to take it with a grain of salt. But Adrian Martinez went 17 for 23, and that's 74% completion rate for 254 yards and 1 touchdown through the air, and then he had 33 more rushing yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. I mentioned Samori Toure. I wanted to bring him up again. He was vital in this. He had 8 catches for 133, and then 3 rushing attempts for 35 yards and 1 other touchdown. Those two seem to be like on the same page pretty quickly. I've heard from the different coaches that the Samori came in and he learned the playbook really quickly. He's a hardworking guy, and he's the team themselves brought him in and are trying to bring him in as like he's been there the whole time. Like, they're trying to form this connection, especially Adrian. Adrian's trying to form a connection with him, and he seems to be a great receiver. He gets open. He gets the timing down with Adrian to where they're catching it in stride, and or along the edge where he can get out of bounds. It doesn't matter. Whatever the chemistry is between those two, it seems to be working really well. Not to discredit any of the other wide receivers, but it seems like those two dudes, he seems to be looking for that guy specifically quite often. What does the win-loss mean to the school? I keep bringing it up. It's just an FCS school, so you got to take it with a grain of salt. But at the same time, I keep mentioning that they do have talented guys. We've seen their linebacker. We've seen their quarterback. Their wide receivers were able to make plays. They were obviously pushing through the line quite often, which I think that speaks more to our offensive line not playing as well, which that was something else I wanted to note. Huskers did put out a official depth chart on. I seen it on Twitter. I couldn't believe how many young guys we have on the team. I'm gonna see if I can pull it up real quick. I mean, I knew we had a lot of young guys, but when you look down the list of, we have Adrian's the junior. We have freshman behind him. We have no juniors or seniors in the running back room. We have one senior in the wide receiver room. Oh, sorry, two seniors in the wide receiver room. No seniors in the tight end room, and then no seniors on the offensive line, and one junior. Is that right? Two juniors. So two juniors on the offensive line. Otherwise, everybody else is a freshman or sophomore. That's the thing. I've been very critical of the offensive line, that they're not holding. They're not. That's going to be the biggest difference in the Big Ten specifically, is that if offensive line cannot hold, cannot give you time to run the ball or pass the ball, and then cannot make the holes and the lanes that the running back needs to get, the running game going. I didn't realize that we had no senior executives on the offensive line. I knew that people have left and people have gone to the NFL and stuff, but to see that is there no starters? There's one. No, yeah, there's one starter at the right guard. That's the Matt Sichterman. Otherwise, it's all sophomores and freshmen. We have Trent Hickson, which he's a center behind Cam Jurgens, but I mean, Cam Jurgens stays in for the most part when he needs to. Like he's the star dude on the offensive line. You hear that from a lot of the other players, but he's the leader of the team and he's a sophomore. So that just goes to show you that, like, yes, that's the biggest criticism of the Huskers at this point, but they are young, and so that's something you gotta keep in mind when you try to rip them to shreds, and the fact that they're in late teens, early 20s. They're just kids still. That's weird for me to say because I'm not that much older. But on the defensive side, we have a lot of upperclassmen, so that's a different story. They should be playing how they're playing, and that's what we expect from them, and that's how they've been showing up, except for the first quarter. But we cannot have these slow starts every game, especially with Buffalo. Looking forward to next week. Buffalo should not be overlooked. I keep seeing a lot of people saying, like, Buffalo is not good. They should come in here. We should beat them easily. They put up 69 points against their opponent this week. And yes, it was an FCS opponent, but we didn't even put up 69 points against our guy. They were up 38-0 at halftime, which means that they come out of the gates and they're firing on all cylinders. They are fast-paced offense, and they're more than capable of putting points up early, which if our defense comes out next game like they did this game where it's going to be a slow start, they're going to put up a ton of points and we're going to be playing from behind, and that's not where we want to be playing given the fact that we're trying to push the running game. You can't run the ball all second half trying to catch up to a quick scoring offense. So we need to score early. We need to score often. And then second half, we can try to run the ball and run the clock. That's going to be very important, I think. We can talk more about that in the pregame episode on Friday. But I keep seeing on Twitter and stuff that people are overlooking Buffalo. They're looking ahead to the Oklahoma game already. And I think that's a big mistake. I don't think the team's going to do that. I don't think Scott Frost, I don't think they have enough confidence. They know like where the program sits right now. They can't overlook anybody, period. We went toe to toe with an FCS school for a quarter. And then, I mean, we beat them like we should have been, but I mean, you still had a quarter where you didn't know, and that can't happen. But we're slowly building confidence. That's what this win means more than anything. Is it's confidence and it's momentum. Like I said, the offensive line is still the young guys. For the most part, they do well. The 4 of the 5 seem to do it. Ethan Piper keeps getting a lot of crap. I see that all over the place. His name specifically, and I don't know if it's because certain podcasts have named him specifically. So then that's who Twitter rags on. But I mean, you do watch tape. Ethan Piper does let people through. But Ethan Piper's a redshirt freshman. He's a freshman. But this is just more experience for the line to sit there and look at tape and be like, oh, I'm doing this wrong. I need to correct this, or I need to work on this, or that's just not working. That technique that I'm using just isn't working. I got to find something else to do. It's just experience at this point. But the schedule that we have coming forward, they're not going to have a ton of time to learn from mistakes. So they need to kind of rev that up. So I don't want to look too far ahead, but you do have to fear the looming disasters that are going to come. But just keep in mind that we are still a young offensive line. We're still a young offense in general. we're just a young team overall, period. But I did want to make a couple notes. I seen that Minnesota's running back, that Ibrahim, he's out for this season, and that is like that's disappointing. Not disappointing is not the right word. That's just it's a sad thing to see. Because when you watch the Ohio State game before he went out, he was a monster in that game. I thought they said that he was the running back in the Big Ten, the number one running back in the Big Ten. Before he went out of the game, he had 30 carries for 163 yards and 2 touchdowns against Ohio State. Ohio State is Ohio State. They're not going to be any pushovers. They're going to be big dudes, talented dudes, and he was running over them like nothing. Like he was able to outrun, you plow over. He was doing it all, and it's just a shame to see that his season's kind of over. It looks like he's looking ahead maybe to entering the draft next year, so he's just going to try to get rested and repaired, and then he's going to move on. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise for him. I hope so. I hope the best for that guy. I hope like that's the thing. You have your fan base. We are obviously Husker fans, but when you see talent like that and then the talent gets hurt, that's rough on any college football fan. So shout out to that guy. Shout out to that Ryan Greenhagen again. I just can't get over the fact that he had 30 tackles. That blows my mind. That's a crazy amount. He had less than that for all 3 of his spring games combined. He had like 23 total tackles in 3 games, and then he comes in here and he has 30 tackles. Like I said, small schools come in here and they play us hard because this is the biggest game of their season. You can't argue that he was playing his heart out. So that's going to wrap up this week's recap anyway. I have nothing else really to say. We do have another game tonight. It's Louisville and Ole Miss, I think. So there's football seasons here, folks. So we have lots of games to watch. As usual, Alabama's on top and everybody else trying to play catch up. Clemson got beat by Georgia, which is Clemson's quarterback looked terrible. This is not a Clemson podcast. We'll wrap up this week's podcast. We'll be here on Friday for another pregame analysis over Buffalo. So until then, you can find me on Twitter at the Cobsmacked Pod, or I do stream on Twitch at These Shadows. So until next time, go Big Red.